I built an empire by the ocean, but somehow I lost the shore called family. Every morning, the sea greets me first. From the wide glass windows of our house in the Florida Keys, the light drifts across the water like a slow promise. I stand there for a while before the day begins, coffee in hand, breathing in salt and silence. Somewhere between the waves, I can almost hear the echo of hammers and shovels, the sound of the life I built from nothing. They call me the man who built the Keys. Maybe that's true, but what they don't know is that while I was building hotels, something inside my home was quietly collapsing. Eleanor hums in the kitchen. Same song she's been humming for 40 years, soft, worn, like the wood of the old porch where we used to sit and dream. She still makes breakfast the same way. 2 scrambled eggs, toast a little burned, coffee that could wake the dead. She brings me a plate. "Eat before it gets cold," she says. And I can tell she's watching my face for something, maybe a smile, maybe peace. I sit across from her at the table. The sunlight falls on her hair, catching the silver strands she no longer bothers to hide. "He hasn't called, has he?" I ask. Her hand stills on the napkin. "Daniel's busy, John. You know how New York is." "Busy's one thing," I say quietly. "Silence another." She looks away, pretending to smooth the tablecloth. "He has the twins and Olivia's family. They keep him running." I nod, though we both know that's not it. The last time we saw him was almost a year ago, and even then, he left early to take a call. When we started Reed Hospitality Group, Daniel was still a kid sweeping floors at our first inn. He used to tell guests that one day, he'd run the whole place. Maybe that's why I worked so hard so he could inherit something better than I had. Now he lives in Manhattan, married into a family that was born with what I fought for. The Carters have money that smells like old wood and private clubs. Olivia's father once told me over dinner, "Self-made men are admirable, but they don't always know how to stay rich." Eleanor said I was too sensitive. Maybe she's right, but I still remember that smirk. She pours me more coffee. I sent them a Christmas card. For the twins. A check inside. I glance up. "There's 6, Ellie." "Thanks for watching it, please." "I know," she says, trying to smile. "But it's never too early to save for college." Her voice trembles a little on the word college. I reach across the table and take her hand. "You've always had faith in him." "I still do." She squeezes my fingers. "He's just lost his way for a bit." Outside, a gull cries. The sound scrapes against the silence in the room. I stand and walk to the porch. From here, you can see the ocean stretching forever. The same horizon that used to look like freedom. Now it feels like distance. The hotels line the shore, like milestones of ambition, bright, perfect, profitable. Each one carries my name, and yet the sound of it means less now. Reed Hospitality. People think it's a brand. For me, it's a family portrait that got left in the rain. Eleanor joins me outside, her robe fluttering in the wind. "You should call him," she says softly. "I did," I tell her. "Last week. He didn't pick up. He'll call back." "Will he?" I ask, though I don't mean to sound cruel. You know what they say about busy people, they always find time for what matters. She doesn't answer. She leans on the railing, eyes fixed on the water. "You worked so hard for him, John. Maybe he feels pressure. Maybe he doesn't know how to stand beside you without feeling small." I want to believe that, but excuses have a way of dulling truth. Inside, the phone buzzes. Eleanor rushes to check. Her face brightens, then fades as quickly. "Bank reminder," she says. Later, I sit alone in my study. The walls are full of photos, ribbon cuttings, magazine covers, and a single framed picture of Daniel at 12, holding those giant scissors with pride. "One day I'll take over everything," he'd said. Back then, it was a promise. Now, it sounds like a prophecy. The computer screen glows in the dim light. I open my email routine, reports, invoices, and then I see his name, Daniel Reed. "Dad, I need another transfer urgent. I'll explain later." No greeting, no sign of life, no "love you," not even a period, just a demand. I stare at it, feeling that old mixture of anger and ache. The empire may have taught me to calculate profits, but it never taught me how to measure disappointment. Eleanor walks in, wiping her hands on a towel. "Is it him?" "Yes." She reads the message, lips pressed tight. Maybe it's serious. You should call. I've called before, I say. Every time, it's another hole to fill. Her voice is small. He's still our son. Yes, I whisper, but saving him has started to feel like losing ourselves. She leaves the room without a word. When the house finally settles into silence, I step outside again. The air tastes like salt and rust. Somewhere out there, the waves roll over each other endlessly, never tired, never learning. I look up at the dark line of the horizon and wonder when distance stopped feeling like safety and started feeling like punishment. It had been a few weeks since Daniel's last message, but the echo of it still sat in my inbox, blinking like a wound that refused to close. I didn't reply. For the first time in years, I didn't send the money. Eleanor never asked why, though I could feel her worry filling every corner of the house. We had dinner in silence that night. She tried to ask about business, about the new property near Marathon Key, but both of us knew it was a way to talk about anything except our son. Afterward, she folded laundry while the TV murmured about Christmas sales and travel deals. The lights on the tree flickered weakly, like they, too, were waiting for something that wouldn't come. He just needs a chance, John, she finally said, not looking up from the towels. He's had plenty of chances, I answered. Each one ends with an apology and another request. She sighed. You were reckless once, too. You just had me to hold the rope. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at that. She wasn't wrong. When I was his age, I gambled everything on a piece of land and a half-built motel. But the difference was, I worked 16 hours a day until it stood. Daniel's bets always involved someone else's money, and lately, it was always mine. The next morning, I went to the HOA meeting at the community hall, a once-a-month ritual of retirees debating mailbox paint colors and lawn heights. It's where people still greet each other by name, where no one cares how much you're worth. I brought a box of donuts and fixed the old ceiling fan before the meeting started. It reminded me that usefulness, in old age, is a kind of survival. John, you've still got it, said Frank Hayes, my old friend and lawyer, as we walked out together. He'd traded courtrooms for fishing rods a decade ago, but still carried that sharpness in his eyes. I've got rust more than anything, I said. But I can still swing a hammer. He gave me a long look. I hear Daniel's in business again. Something tech-related? That's what he said, I muttered. Frank adjusted his cap. You know, John, I don't think he's the one calling the shots. Word is, Olivia's father's been nosing around Miami investors. Be careful. That girl's clever, but not the good kind of clever. I felt my stomach knot. You think she's behind it? I think she's the one who believes she's entitled to what you built. He shrugged. Old money never sees self-made men as equals, only as opportunities. The words stuck with me long after Frank drove off in his pickup. On the way home, the sun caught the roofs of my hotels down the shoreline, each one shimmering like a reminder of how far we'd come and how fragile it all was. When I walked through the front door, Eleanor was sitting on the couch, phone pressed to her ear. I could tell by her expression before she even spoke who it was. Yes, of course, she said softly. We'd love to see you, sweetheart. Maybe around Easter? Oh, that's fine. I understand. Give our love to the kids. When she hung up, her eyes were glassy. It was Olivia, she said. Daniel's busy. They'll try to visit in the spring. Spring, I repeated, like the word itself was a joke. That's 4 months away. She nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. They have a lot going on. I wanted to ask, doing what, exactly? But I didn't. I'd seen that look before, the one she wore when she needed to protect hope like a small, dying flame. That night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the framed photo of us from our 35th anniversary. Daniel wasn't there that day either. He'd called, said he couldn't make the flight. Olivia had a family event. There's always a reason, I thought. Always something more important. I poured myself a drink and stepped out onto the porch. The sky was awash of stars, and the tide was rolling in. Somewhere across that vast distance, my son lived in a penthouse, surrounded by lights that didn't flicker. Maybe he looked out at the same stars, or maybe he'd forgotten they existed. As the night breeze brushed against me, I made a decision I hadn't made in years. I would see for myself what my family had become. and I would do it on my own terms. The next few days passed with the slow rhythm of December in Florida warm air, the scent of salt and pine, and the sound of retirees fixing things that didn't need fixing. I tried to keep my hands busy, oiling the deck rails, tightening bolts on the dock, sorting through papers I hadn't touched in years. But underneath it all, a thought pulsed, steady and sharp. I need to see the truth for myself. Eleanor didn't know I was planning to leave. Not yet. I didn't want to worry her until I was sure. I told myself it was just a visit, a surprise before Christmas, something to remind Daniel what family still looked like. But deep down, I think I needed proof that I hadn't failed as a father, or that maybe it wasn't all my fault. On Friday morning, I drove into town to pick up some supplies and ended up at the diner near the marina. It's the same one I've gone to for 20 years, the kind of place where coffee never runs out and everyone knows everyone's business. The waitress, Patty, slid me my usual before I even sat down. "Big plans for the holidays, Mr. Reed?" she asked, cheerful as ever. "Thinking about heading north for a bit," I said. "Surprise visit." She smiled. "Good for you. Families need that kind of thing. Keeps folks honest." Her words lingered longer than they should have. As I ate, I heard two men at the counter talking about real estate, Miami buyers, investment funds, property transfers. My ears perked up when I caught a name I knew. Carter. I turned slightly, pretending to stir my coffee. "Yeah," one man said. "Old man Carter's son-in-law runs that hotel chain down south, Reed something. Rumor is the Carters are moving into hospitality, merging brands or some such." "Reed?" the other man chuckled. "Didn't know you could merge bloodlines with money." They both laughed, and something inside me turned cold. When I got home, Eleanor was out in the garden trimming the hibiscus. She looked up and smiled like nothing was wrong, and for a second, I wished I could stay in that illusion. "I was thinking," I said carefully, "maybe we should spend Christmas up north this year." Her hands froze midair. "You mean New York?" "Why not? We haven't seen the twins in over a year." She hesitated. "You think Daniel will be happy if we just show up like that?" I forced a small grin. "That's the point of a surprise, isn't it?" Eleanor didn't answer. She went back to clipping the branches, and the sound of the shears filled the space between us. After a moment, she said softly, "If you go, promise me one thing. Don't go there to argue. Just go to see him." "I would know. I promise," I said, though part of me already knew that wasn't true. That night, she went to the little church down the street for evening prayer. I stayed home, pacing the living room. On the coffee table was a photo album she'd left open. Christmas mornings from years past, Daniel in his pajamas, Eleanor laughing beside a lopsided tree, wrapping paper everywhere. Each page felt heavier than the last, as if the memories themselves had gained weight. When Eleanor returned, her eyes were red. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me on the couch and leaned her head on my shoulder. "He'll come around, John," she whispered. "He always does." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed her anymore. Later, when she went to bed, I packed a small suitcase. Just clothes, my passport, and a folder of documents, bank statements, property titles, trust papers. I didn't know why I brought them, only that something told me I might need them soon. The next morning came quietly. The sun rose pale and slow over the water, painting the world gold one last time before I left it. Eleanor was still asleep when I wrote her a note and placed it by the coffee pot. "Back before Christmas. Don't worry. I just need to see him with my own eyes." At the airport, the hum of engines filled the air, a sound that reminded me of ambition and distance, two things that had ruled my life for far too long. As the plane taxied down the runway, I looked out the window and saw the ocean stretching endlessly beneath the morning light. I whispered to myself, not sure whether it was a prayer or a warning, "Let this trip bring me back something I haven't lost completely." And as the plane lifted into the sky, leaving the keys behind, I had no idea that what waited on the other side would change everything. The snow hadn't reached New York yet, but the city air still bit like glass when I stepped out of the cab. The driver had asked if I was visiting family. I said yes, though the word family tasted unfamiliar now. The street was lit with garlands and wreaths, and every townhouse window flickered with Christmas light. I looked up at Daniel's building, a 3-story brick home with white shutters, the kind of place that said money marries money. I hadn't told him I was coming, that was the point. I wanted to see our son as he truly was. Not the version that picked up the phone once a month to ask for a small favor. The doorman recognized my last name and hesitated. "Mr. Reed, they're hosting tonight? Big Christmas Eve thing?" "I won't stay long," I said. "Just family business." He nodded and stepped aside. I walked past him, heart heavy, hand cold around the spare key I'd kept since the day we helped Daniel buy this house. The lock still turned easily. That surprised me he hadn't changed it. The door opened, and music spilled out, smooth and expensive. Sinatra singing "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." For a second, I almost smiled. It was the same song Eleanor used to hum while hanging ornaments. Then I saw the people. The living room glittered with gold ribbon and glass ornaments. A grand piano gleamed in the corner, surrounded by guests in tailored suits and designer dresses. A woman laughed a high, practiced sound and clinked her glass against another. And there, at the center of it all, was Daniel. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. His arm draped around Olivia. Her parents stood nearby, holding glasses of champagne, nodding like royalty. The house was full, but the one person missing was the one who should have been smiling beside him. Then I heard it, Eleanor's voice, faint, almost swallowed by the music. It came from the back patio. I walked quietly down the hallway, heart pounding. The sliding door was half open, and there she was, my wife sitting alone on a wicker chair, staring at the skyline through the glass. Her eyes were red, her hands gripping a tissue like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. The sight hit me harder than any betrayal could. She didn't notice me at first. Inside, laughter rose again, and Olivia's mother's voice rang clear. "You did the right thing, Daniel. It's time for you two to take charge. Your parents had their run." I froze. Daniel replied, voice calm, too calm. "Dad's too old to manage things anyway. Olivia's parents will help us transfer the property smoothly." My stomach twisted. Then Olivia spoke, light and casual, like she was discussing dinner reservations. "Once Mom signs, everything falls in place. They won't even notice." Eleanor closed her eyes. I saw her shoulders tremble. She had been forced to listen to this, to sit outside her own son's house and hear them plot to strip us of everything. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and pressed record. The screen glowed faintly in the dark as their voices carried on. Olivia's father chuckled. "Well, these things are always easier when handled quietly. No need for confrontation. We'll tell the lawyers it's an early succession." Daniel said nothing, just nodded. I could almost hear the echo of the boy he once was, buried under the man standing in that room. A movement to my right made me stiffen. One of the catering staff, a young man no older than 20, had spotted me from the hallway. His eyes widened when he recognized me from the framed family photos on the wall. He opened his mouth, but I lifted a finger to my lips. "Tell no one I'm here," I whispered. He hesitated, then nodded slowly, fear in his eyes. Inside, Olivia raised her glass. "To the new beginning," she said, and as the glasses clinked, I realized that for them, this wasn't betrayal, it was business. I turned toward the patio again. Eleanor finally looked up and saw me through the glass. For a moment, she didn't move, then her lips parted, trembling. I shook my head gently, motioning her to stay quiet. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. The laughter inside grew louder, sharper. I slipped back into the shadows of the hall, the phone still recording in my hand, my pulse beating like a drum against the walls of my chest. Something in me, something that had been dormant for years, was waking up. I stayed in the shadows for what felt like forever, watching through the sliver of doorway as strangers filled the home I once helped my son buy. Their laughter mixed with the hum of soft jazz, the clinking of silverware, and the faint sound of a fireplace crackling. It was the kind of scene you'd expect from a glossy magazine, perfect, elegant, hollow. Eleanor sat motionless outside, her hands clasped tightly on her lap, her face half lit by the glow of the patio lights. I wanted to go to her, to pull her away from all this. But something colder held me in place, the need to see everything, to know just how deep this betrayal went. Daniel's voice broke through the chatter again. "Olivia, are you sure about this? It just feels wrong." For one split second, I saw a flicker of the boy I'd raised, the hesitation, the decency I thought I'd lost him to. But then Olivia's hand touched his arm, and her tone turned silk smooth. Daniel, your parents have had their time. You told me yourself your dad's tired, your mom's fragile. We're just taking responsibility. That's what family does. Her father chimed in, grinning. It's not betrayal, son, it's business. You think old money survives by playing fair? The laughter that followed stung worse than any insult could. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. I wanted to storm in, to shout that I was still alive, still strong, still the man who'd built every brick of their fortune with his own 2 hands. But then I looked at Eleanor again, how small she seemed on that patio, how she didn't even have the strength to cry anymore. I realized this wasn't the moment to rage. This was the moment to remember, to record. A plan began to take shape in my mind, clear and sharp as the winter air outside. I slipped down the hallway, the phone still recording, catching bits of their voices as I passed the doorway. Once the paperwork's signed, we'll move them into that coastal property for retirement. Good idea, Olivia's mother said. A quiet place, nothing too flashy. They'll think it's a gift. I bit down hard, tasting metal in my mouth. A gift. That's what they called it, tricking us out of our home, our company, our life's work. The young waiter from earlier appeared again near the kitchen, still pale, still unsure if I was real. I caught his gaze and whispered, "You didn't see me." He nodded quickly and disappeared into the back. I found the side door and stepped outside into the cold. The air hit me like truth, sharp, unforgiving. I walked along the side of the house, keeping to the shadows, until I reached the patio. Eleanor turned when she heard my steps. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other, 2 ghosts in a house that no longer belonged to us. "John," she breathed, her voice cracking, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should they," I said quietly. She looked toward the window, where our son was laughing at something Olivia's father said. "He doesn't mean it," she whispered. "He's just lost." "Lost people don't draw maps to other people's graves," I said. Her eyes filled again, and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath, my voice steady now. "What I should have done a long time ago. Protect us." She shook her head. "Please, John, don't make it ugly." "It's already ugly," I said. "I'm just going to make it honest." For a moment, she looked at me like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I didn't either. Inside, a cheer erupted. Someone was making a toast. We both turned to look. Daniel stood with a glass in his hand, smiling the smile of a man who didn't yet know what he'd lost. "To new beginnings," he said again. The words echoed through the glass and seemed to hang in the air between us. I turned to Eleanor, my voice a whisper. "Go home, Ellie. Pack what you need. I'll follow soon." She gripped my sleeve. "John, what are you planning?" I looked past her at the house, the people inside, the life we'd built brick by brick now being carved up like a roast. "I'm planning," I said slowly, "to remind them who built this family in the first place." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, and nodded. As I walked away, the sound of music and laughter faded behind me. The phone in my pocket still glowed faintly, the recording proof of everything I'd heard. We drove through the night without a word. The wipers dragged across the windshield, smearing the Florida rain into gray ribbons. Eleanor sat beside me, her face turned toward the window, the reflection of passing headlights flickering across her cheeks. Neither of us spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because too much had already been said without words. Frank Hayes lived near Marathon Key, in a small apartment above his law office. I'd known him since we were young bellhops in Miami, back before I'd built my first inn, back before I understood how loneliness could follow a man even into success. Frank opened the door in a robe, blinking at us. "Jesus, John," he muttered. "It's Christmas Eve." "I know," I said, "but I need your help." He didn't ask why. Maybe old friends don't need explanations when your eyes already say everything. He ushered us in, turned on the coffee maker, and told Eleanor she could take the guest room. When the door shut behind her, I sat at the small kitchen table, staring into the steam curling up from my mug. My hands still trembled, not from age, but from rage. Frank sat opposite me. Start from the beginning. I told him everything, the party, the conversation, the recordings. His jaw tightened with every detail. "Those people," he said slowly, "are not just greedy, they're stupid. They think you're old enough to forget how to fight." "I remember," I said, "and I still have every receipt." He nodded, eyes sharp. "Then we'll make it clean and legal. No shouting, no scandal, just consequences." We worked through the night. Frank made the calls, his voice calm but firm, canceling the power of attorney I'd foolishly granted Daniel months earlier, freezing access to company accounts, and drafting an emergency trust deed, naming Eleanor as lifetime beneficiary. By dawn, my anger had settled into something colder clarity. Eleanor emerged from the guest room, her hair still damp from a quick shower, eyes swollen but composed. "John, are you sure about this?" "Absolutely," I said. "He left me no choice." She nodded, but I saw the tremor in her hands. "He's still our son." "Yes," I said softly, "but that doesn't mean he gets to bury us alive." Frank slid a folder across the table. "All done. Everything's legally sealed. By the time they wake up, the house, the accounts, the company, all of it will be under Eleanor's name through the trust. They can't touch a cent." I took a long breath, the first I'd truly taken in days. "Now," Frank added, "you mentioned fraud and trespassing. You have evidence?" I pulled out my phone and played the recording. The sound of Daniel's voice filled the small kitchen. "Dad's too old to manage things. Once Mom signs, everything falls in place." Frank shook his head. "That's enough for the sheriff to act on. We'll frame it as unlawful occupancy and attempted financial coercion. They'll be lucky to walk away with a fine." Eleanor's lips parted. "You're going to call the police?" "I already did," I said. "They'll be there within the hour." She covered her mouth, whispering, "John, please." I reached across the table, taking her hand. "Ellie, they took our kindness for weakness. This isn't revenge, it's justice." Frank leaned back. Couldn't have said it better myself. We drove back to the house just after sunrise. The sky was a pale coral, streaked with the promise of another hot Florida day. Christmas morning. Most people were waking to gifts and hymns. I was driving toward war. As we approached the gate, I saw 2 sheriff's cars already parked by the curb, red and blue lights muted in the daylight. A deputy stepped forward, nodding as Frank showed him the paperwork. Inside, the house was still decorated garlands drooping from the banister, the faint smell of wine and perfume lingering in the air. Daniel was in the living room, barefoot, hair tousled, wearing a silk robe that wasn't his. Olivia sat beside him, clutching a mug of coffee like it might save her. Her parents were there too, pale and silent. When Daniel saw me, his jaw fell open. "Dad?" Eleanor stood behind me, trembling but firm. I held out the folder. "The trust is signed. The power of attorney is revoked. You and your in-laws are hereby trespassing in a private residence." "What are you talking about?" Olivia snapped, her voice cracking. "This house is ours." "Not anymore," Frank said, stepping in. "Mr. Reed has reclaimed ownership through lawful channels. You're to vacate immediately." Her father's face turned purple. "You can't do this. We've had an agreement." "An agreement forged through deceit," Frank cut him off. "And recorded evidence." And another. Daniel stood up, eyes wild. "You'd ruin your own son over money?" I looked at him then, not the man he wanted to be, but the boy I once carried on my shoulders through hotel corridors. "No," I said quietly. "Not for money. For dignity." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the sheriff nodded to his deputies. The sound of footsteps echoed against the marble floors as the deputies stepped forward. One of them, a tall woman with kind eyes, spoke in a low professional tone. "Sir, we just need you to gather your belongings. You'll have time to sort things out later." Daniel's voice broke. "You can't do this. This is my home." I felt a chill run through me, not from triumph, but from grief. That word, home, used to mean something sacred in our family. We built ours through sacrifice, through sweat on construction sites, through nights spent counting every dollar to keep the lights on. And now my own son threw it around like a legal claim. Olivia turned to Eleanor, her face a blend of fury and disbelief. "You could have stopped him. You could have told him not to do this." Eleanor's voice trembled. "I begged him not to make me choose. But you and Daniel did that for me. Her father, a man with the kind of face you only see behind country club walls, pointed a finger at me. "You'll regret this, Reed. Families like ours don't lose." I looked at him, and for the first time that morning, I almost smiled. "Then maybe you've never met a man who started with nothing." The deputies began leading them out one by one. Olivia went first, clutching her designer bag like a shield. Her mother followed, muttering something about barbaric behavior. Daniel stood last, hands trembling as he watched them go. Then, just as one deputy reached for his arm, he turned to me. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, voice breaking. I thought you'd understand I was trying to keep the company safe." "The company?" I said. "You mean the empire I built while you were still playing baseball in our driveway? That company?" He swallowed hard. "You made me feel useless, Dad. Like I'd never measure up." The words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, the anger faltered, replaced by a pang of something older, sadder. Guilt, maybe. The kind a father carries long after his son stops listening. But then I remembered Eleanor sitting outside on that balcony, invisible in her own house, while he and his in-laws plotted her erasure. Whatever sympathy I had burned away. "I gave you everything," I said quietly. "And you tried to take what wasn't yours, your mother's peace, my name, our dignity. That's not how family works." He glared at me, eyes red. "I hate you." "I can live with that," I said. "What I couldn't live with was shame." The deputy placed a hand on his shoulder. Daniel jerked away, shouting, "You think this is justice? You'll die alone, old man." Maybe he was right. Maybe I would. But at least I'd die standing, not kneeling before the greed of my own blood. Eleanor started crying, then quietly, the way women cry when there are no more words left. I put an arm around her as they led Daniel out, his curses echoing down the hallway. When the last car pulled away, the silence felt like the ocean after a storm, heavy, endless, but clean. Frank stayed behind to finish the paperwork. "It's over," he said. "At least the ugly part." "Nothing's over," I muttered. "Not yet." He looked at me cautiously. "You've got what you wanted, John. They're out. You won." I shook my head. "Winning doesn't feel like this." He studied me for a moment, then placed a hand on my shoulder. "Go easy on yourself. You did what any man with a conscience would do." Eleanor and I stood by the window as the deputies' cars disappeared around the corner. The Christmas lights still blinked faintly on the porch, red, green, red reflecting off the puddles left by the rain. For a second, the house looked almost peaceful again, as if pretending nothing had happened. Eleanor whispered, "What happens now?" I took a long look around the room, the garlands, the empty champagne glasses, the half-eaten cake still sitting on the table. Everything felt staged, unreal, like a bad play that had just ended. "Now," I said, "we rebuild. But this time not for him." She nodded, her fingers finding mine. "Do you think he'll ever understand?" "Maybe," I said. "But understanding doesn't erase what's been done." Frank cleared his throat behind us. "The police will call with updates in a few days. Fraud charges take time. They'll likely try to negotiate." "Let them," I said. "I'm done negotiating with people who mistake kindness for weakness." He smiled, faintly. "There's the John I remember. Have a god." Eleanor turned to me, her eyes red but steady. "John, promise me one thing." "What?" "When this is over, don't let the bitterness win." I nodded slowly. "I won't, but I'll never forget either." It had been about a month since that Christmas morning when the sirens faded down our street and the house fell quiet again. The lawyers stopped calling. The reporters lost interest. The town found another scandal to whisper about. But inside the walls of our home, silence had moved in like an uninvited guest. Daniel was released within a week, no charges pressed after the investigation found insufficient evidence of intent. I suppose even justice has its limits. Olivia packed her things and left for New York the same day, dragging the twins behind her. There was no goodbye, no call, just a thin line of tire marks on the driveway that the rain washed away by evening. Eleanor and I stayed behind at the Keys. The sea was calm, the sun still generous, but everything felt smaller somehow. The neighbors greeted us kindly, though their eyes carried that look half pity, half curiosity. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when a wealthy man's family tears itself apart in public. The Marathon Gazette ran a piece titled, "Betrayal in Paradise. Family Fraud Scandal Rocks Reed Hotels." I read it once and never again. The article didn't lie, but it didn't understand either. To them, it was drama. To me, it was dismemberment. Frank called almost every day at first, checking on Eleanor's health, making sure I didn't do anything stupid or heroic, as he liked to say. Then his calls came less often, maybe because there was nothing left to discuss. "Justice is done," he said one afternoon over the phone. "Now you have to live with it." I didn't answer. What could I say? Justice might have been served, but it tasted like ashes. At night, the only sound left was the ocean brushing against the dock. I used to love that rhythm. It reminded me of long days and fresh starts. Now it sounded like breathing from something I'd killed. Eleanor tried to fill the silence. She went to church every evening, lighting candles and whispering prayers for Daniel. Sometimes she'd ask me to come along. Sometimes I did, but more often I stayed behind, pretending to work on the business. The truth was, Reed Hospitality had survived, but barely. The scandal hurt our image, and bookings dipped. Investors grew cautious. Some whispered that I was unstable. Others that I was too emotional to manage leadership anymore. I'd been called worse. We cut costs, sold a minor property, and restructured. Still, I couldn't bring myself to step inside the office tower in Miami. The thought of standing in that boardroom again, pretending everything was normal, made me sick. So I stayed here by the water, with the ghosts of my choices. One evening, Eleanor came home from church holding an envelope. Her eyes shimmered with something between hope and fear. "It's from Daniel," she said quietly. I froze. For a moment, I didn't know whether to take it or burn it. She held it out to me. "You should read it." I took the envelope but didn't open it right away. We sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the palms. She held my hand the way she used to, before ambition, before anger. Finally, I tore it open. The paper smelled faintly of old ink and regret. "Dad, I'm sorry, not for getting caught, for forgetting what you taught me. I don't expect forgiveness. I just can't face you yet. Please tell Mom I'm okay." "Daniel." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and slipped it back into the envelope. Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "What did he say?" "That he's sorry," I said, "and that he can't come home yet." She nodded, blinking away tears. "That's something, John. That's a start." I didn't answer. I walked into my study, opened the safe behind the bookshelf, and placed the letter inside. Then I locked it. Eleanor followed me with her eyes as I did it. "You're saving it?" "Yes," I said, "for when he means it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, notebook open, pen hovering over the first page. Frank once told me writing helps organize the noise in your head, so I began. December. Justice won't quiet the ghosts. Maybe justice was never the point. I paused, listening to the waves. They say forgiveness frees the soul. But forgiveness without repentance feels like handing the knife back to the same hand. I closed the notebook and set it aside. Outside, the tide was rising again. Eleanor's voice drifted from the bedroom. "Come to bed, John." "In a minute," I said. When I finally joined her, she was already asleep, her breathing slow, peaceful. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling fan turning in lazy circles. My thoughts spun slower, now more tired than angry. The next morning, I made coffee for both of us. The act felt ordinary, grounding. She smiled faintly, saying, "That's the first time you've done that in months." "I needed something to do with my hands," I said. She chuckled softly, and for a brief moment, we were just two old souls in a quiet house again. But the silence never truly left. It lingered, a reminder that peace earned through loss is the loneliest kind. Later that week, Frank dropped by unannounced, bringing groceries and the day's paper. "You two need some company," he said, "and maybe a reason to leave the house." Eleanor brightened at once, offering him tea. But I saw the way his eyes darted to me, gauging if I'd bite. "You still keeping tabs on Daniel?" I asked. Frank sighed. "Not officially, but word gets around. He's in Miami, working at a small hotel front desk clerk. Long hours, little pay." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "So he's alive." "Alive," Frank said, and apparently sober. "That's a start." Eleanor's eyes glistened again. "He's working. That's good, isn't it, John? I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was good or just inevitable. Work will teach him what I couldn't, and I was. Frank stirred his tea. You could call him, you know. No, I said. Not yet. He needs to rebuild, not return. Frank smiled faintly. You sound like an old preacher. I'm too tired for sermons, I replied. Just facts. As evening fell, Eleanor went to light her candle again. I stood on the porch, watching the horizon swallow the sun. The ocean glimmered gold before turning black. Somewhere out there, my son was facing his own darkness. Frank's words stayed with me long after he left that evening. He's working. He's sober. 2 short sentences that should have been comforting, yet they settled inside me like stones. I spent the next morning down by the dock, watching the tide shift and scatter against the pilings. The seagulls screamed overhead, picking fights over scraps. Everything in nature, it seemed, was built on competition. Even beauty had its cruelty. Eleanor joined me with her cup of tea. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, "You still love him, don't you?" I stared at the water. Love doesn't vanish, Ellie. It just changes shape, turns heavy. She nodded, her eyes far away. You used to say love was a promise, not a feeling. I did, I said. But promises break when one side stops showing up. We stood in silence, the wind curling her hair. Somewhere in that silence, she reached for my hand. For once, I didn't pull away. Later that afternoon, Frank called again. Got an update, he said. Daniel and Olivia officially filed for divorce. She's gone back to New York full-time. Good, I muttered. They poisoned each other long enough. Frank sighed. Maybe. But I hear she's keeping the twins with her. He's barely scraping by. I didn't answer. The truth was, I didn't know what to feel anymore. Pity, anger, exhaustion, they all blended into one long ache. That night, after Eleanor went to bed, I sat at the desk and reopened my notebook. January. When justice quiets down, guilt grows louder. I let the pen linger. Maybe punishment isn't always the opposite of mercy. Sometimes, it's the same thing wearing a different face. I closed the book and stared out the window. The dock lights flickered, casting pale reflections over the black water. Meanwhile, miles away, Daniel was learning to live small. He rented a 1-bedroom apartment in the rougher part of Miami, cracked tiles, flickering hallway lights, the faint hum of traffic seeping through the walls. The first night he slept there, he lay awake listening to the neighbor's TV blaring through paper-thin plaster. He used to sleep on Egyptian cotton. Now, the sheets came from a thrift store bin. He woke up before dawn, dressed in a plain white shirt and cheap tie, and took the bus to a hotel off Biscayne Boulevard. Nothing like the luxury resorts that bore his family name. The sign outside read, Seaside Inn. The paint was peeling. His job was simple. Front desk clerk. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Minimum wage. He smiled for tourists who didn't care who he was, answered phones that rang endlessly, and mopped up coffee spills when the night janitor didn't show. The manager, a gruff Cuban named Hector, yelled often, "You're too slow, Reed. Guests don't wait for your family drama." Daniel bit back his pride, nodded, and said, "Yes, sir." At night, he came home to silence. No Olivia. No children's laughter. No car in the driveway. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of his own heartbeat. He tried calling Olivia once, but the call went to voicemail. He left no message. A week later, he mailed 2 small boxes toys for Noah and Sophie. Inside, he added handwritten notes. "Daddy loves you. Be good for Mom." A month passed with no reply. Then the boxes came back, unopened, with a note scrawled in Olivia's handwriting. "Stop confusing them." Daniel stared at the packages for a long time before tossing them into the closet. That night, he went for a walk. The streets were still wet from rain. He passed a diner, the kind open all night, where an old couple sat sharing a piece of pie. They laughed quietly, heads leaning close. He thought of his parents. Maybe they're laughing now too, he told himself. Maybe they're free of me. He didn't know that, in that same moment, Eleanor was on her knees at church, whispering his name into the flicker of a candle. Back in the Keys, Frank visited again with another update. "Daniel's in trouble," he said, setting his briefcase on the table. "Looks like he got scammed into signing a fake contract at the hotel, something about a consulting bonus that doesn't exist. They fired him, kept his last paycheck as a fee." Eleanor gasped, hand to her chest. "He's lost his job?" "Afraid so," Frank said. "He's broke again. I think he's selling his car." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "That's twice he's trusted the wrong people. Maybe now he'll finally look in the mirror." Eleanor looked at me with quiet accusation. "You could help him." "I could," I said, "but I won't. Not yet." She turned away, shaking her head. "You're starting to sound like the men you fought against all your life." Her words landed like stones, but I didn't respond. Later, after she went to bed, I found myself walking down to the shoreline again. The moon hung low and orange, and the sea breathed against the rocks in steady rhythm. I thought of Daniel somewhere out there, fighting tides of his own. Maybe I'd done the right thing. Maybe I hadn't. When I returned to the house, I noticed an envelope on the front step. No return address. Just a single line written in neat handwriting. "Reed Hospitality. Consulting opportunity." I stared at it, the ink catching the porch light. Part of me smiled. Frank's handwriting, I'd recognize it anywhere. He was testing him. Testing us. Eleanor stepped into the doorway behind me, her voice soft and uncertain. "What's that, John?" I looked back at her, the letter still in my hand. "Maybe," I said, "a chance to see who our son really is now." I didn't tell Eleanor what I was planning. At least not at first. Frank and I had gone over every word of the setup, the contract, the email, the alias. I wanted it clean, professional, impossible to trace. The idea wasn't revenge. It was truth. After all those years, I needed to know if Daniel had finally learned what integrity costs when no one's watching. Frank had someone he trusted, a man named Morgan, retired executive turned consultant. Steady, composed, and discreet. He would pose as a representative of a new hospitality venture seeking collaboration with Reed Hospitality. The bait was simple. A lucrative hotel project with a hidden clause that would favor Reed but exploit smaller local contractors. The kind of trap Daniel once would have signed blindfolded, as long as it promised power. Eleanor found out 2 nights before the meeting. We were having dinner, salmon, asparagus, and silence when she looked up from her plate and said quietly, "You're testing him, aren't you?" I froze. "Who told you?" "Frank doesn't keep secrets well," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Then it vanished. "Is that what this family has become, John? Tests and traps?" I put down my fork. "It's not a trap, Ellie. It's a mirror. I just need to see if he recognizes his reflection this time." She sighed. "And if he fails? Then at least I'll know where the truth ends." Her eyes softened. "You're not doing this for truth. You're doing it for peace. You won't rest until you believe he's changed." I didn't answer. She was right. I wasn't sure anymore whether I wanted to prove Daniel's goodness or justify my distance. Daniel arrived at the Miami office that Friday morning with a folder tucked under his arm and hope flickering somewhere behind tired eyes. The email from Morgan Associates had been formal and promising an invitation to consult on the design of a new coastal property, a chance to rebuild your professional reputation. He'd almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But then he saw the name Reed Hospitality in the footer and froze. Now, standing before the glass doors of the downtown office, he took a deep breath before stepping inside. The space looked legitimate, sleek furniture, abstract art, coffee machine humming softly in the corner. A woman at the reception desk smiled. "Mr. Reed, Mr. Morgan will see you now." He nodded, following her into a conference room overlooking Biscayne Bay. Morgan was waiting by the window, wearing a navy suit and a calm expression. "Daniel," he said warmly, extending a hand. "I've heard quite a bit about your background. Please, have a seat." Daniel sat. "I appreciate you reaching out, sir." Morgan smiled. "We're developing a boutique resort chain. Reed Hospitality's brand still carries weight, and I believe you could bring a personal touch to this project." Daniel felt the faintest swell of pride, something he hadn't felt in years. "I'd be honored," he said carefully. Morgan slid a folder across the table. "Take your time reviewing. It's a preliminary contract. Nothing binding yet, just an outline of terms." Daniel opened it. At first glance, it looked standard percentages, projections, signatures. Then he noticed the clause on page 7. The contractor shall retain exclusive rights to amend subcontractor agreements at their discretion, without prior approval. He frowned. That's unusual. Morgan leaned back casually. It's standard flexibility in ventures like this. Gives us room to maneuver. Daniel looked up. Flexibility for you. But the subcontractors lose oversight. They could end up underpaid, even defrauded, and they'd have no recourse. Morgan raised an eyebrow. You know your way around contracts. I used to, Daniel said, before I forgot who I was signing for. He flipped through a few more pages. His pulse slowed, the old instinct for easy profit replaced by a new and unfamiliar clarity. He pushed the folder back across the table. I can't sign this. Morgan smiled faintly. Even if it means walking away from a 6-figure offer? Daniel stood up. Especially because of that. I've learned that money without honor is debt you never finish paying. Morgan studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you for your time, Mr. Reed. We'll be in touch. When Daniel left the room, Morgan waited until the door clicked shut before reaching for his phone. He typed a single text message. He passed. That evening, I was out on the porch, oiling the hinges on the old rocking chair when Frank's truck pulled up. He got out, holding his phone like it was something holy. He did it, John. I stopped mid-motion. Did what? He refused. Read every line, asked the right questions, and walked away. Didn't even take the coffee we offered. For a moment, I didn't move. I felt the tension drain from my shoulders, slow and unfamiliar like air leaving a balloon that had been tight for too many years. Eleanor, who'd been tending her garden nearby, straightened up. So? She asked, her voice trembling just slightly. Frank grinned. Your son's not the same man anymore. She turned to me. You hear that, John? He didn't take the deal. I nodded, setting the oil can down. My voice came out lower than I expected. Maybe he's finally learned, assented another. Eleanor's smile was soft but heavy with tears. That's all I ever prayed for. I stared out toward the horizon, where the sun was sinking into the sea, the water burning orange and gold. He'll get a letter, I said quietly. From me. Later that night, I sat at the old desk where this whole story had begun. The lamp cast a cone of yellow light across the wooden surface. I pulled out a sheet of letterhead Reed Hospitality Group, embossed at the top, though the company was no longer really mine. The words came slowly, but they came honest. Daniel, I've watched from far away, and I've seen the man you've become. It took time, pain, and loss, but you've rebuilt something no one can steal from you again. Your integrity. Meet me at the old pier, Sunday, 6 p.m. No more contracts, just us. Dad. I folded the paper neatly, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote his address by hand. My handwriting trembled a little, but the ink stayed steady enough to finish. As I walked to the mailbox, Eleanor followed quietly. Are you ready for that meeting? She asked. I nodded. I've been waiting my whole life for it. The envelope slid into the slot with a small final click. Somewhere between the metal and the night air, a weight lifted from my chest. Sunday came with a slow sunrise, the kind that starts gray before turning gold. I woke early, long before Eleanor stirred. The house was quiet, but the ocean wasn't. The tide had crept high overnight, licking the base of the pier like it was remembering something. I brewed coffee, black and strong, then stood at the window watching the water move. My reflection looked older than I remembered. Maybe that was what truth did, it aged you. Eleanor came down the stairs, wrapped in her cream cardigan. You're leaving early, she said softly. I want to get there before he does. She nodded, setting her hand on my arm. John, don't go there just to forgive him. Go there to see him. I looked at her. Is there a difference? Yes, she said, smiling faintly. Forgiveness can be duty. Seeing someone again, that's love. I reached the old pier just before 6. The boards creaked under my boots, still slick from the spray. This place hadn't changed much in 40 years, the same wooden rails, the same stubborn pelicans perched on the posts. It was where Eleanor and I used to walk when we were young, back when we had nothing but dreams and each other. Now, it was where I'd find out if those dreams had survived, in our son. At exactly 6, I saw him. Daniel, walking slowly down the boardwalk, hands buried in his jacket pockets. He looked smaller somehow, not weaker, but human again. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Humility. He stopped a few feet away. The wind tousled his hair, carrying the faint salt of the sea between us. "Hi, Dad." His voice cracked on the second word. "Daniel." My throat felt thick, the name heavier than I expected. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped forward and held out his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, but trembling. We stood there, 2 men bound by blood and years of silence. He tried to speak, stopped, then finally whispered, "You didn't lose a son. You helped him find himself." The words hit me harder than I was ready for. I felt my jaw tighten, my chest ache. I'd imagined this conversation 100 times, but never like this, never so quiet, never so real. I turned away for a moment, blinking against the sting behind my eyes. "Took you long enough?" I said, half laughing, half breaking. He smiled faintly. "Yeah. I had to take the long way home. 7s. We sat down on the edge of the pier, feet hanging over the side. The sun was sliding low now, turning the water to molten bronze. Gulls circled overhead, crying out as if they too had stories to confess. "I read your letter," Daniel said after a while. "I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." "I didn't," I admitted. "But your mother never stopped praying that I would." He nodded slowly. "She called once. I didn't answer." "You should," I said. "She misses her boy, too." He stared out at the horizon. "I'm not sure I'm that boy anymore." "Good," I said quietly. That boy was lost. The silence between us wasn't heavy this time. It was full like soil after rain. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "There's something I want you to see." It was an offer letter. A real one, this time. From a small inn up in Key Largo. Manager position, decent pay, modest benefits. They said they liked how honest I was in my interview, he said, half embarrassed. I smiled. Imagine that. Honesty being an asset. He laughed softly. Worlds full of surprises. Then his tone changed, quieter. "Dad, I'm sorry. For everything. For the greed, the lies, the way I treated Mom. I thought success would make me like you. I didn't realize the price you paid to stay yourself." I nodded slowly. "It wasn't success that built this family, son. It was work and respect. You forgot that for a while. So did I." He frowned. "You?" "I forgot what it meant to believe in someone even when they fall. I made justice my God and forgot mercy sits beside it." He stared at me for a long moment, then said, almost in a whisper, "You were right to do what you did." "Maybe," I said. "But being right doesn't mean it didn't hurt." The sun slipped behind the horizon, leaving a trail of red on the water. Daniel stood, brushing off his jeans. I rose too. We faced each other as the first evening lights came on along the pier. The moment felt final and new all at once. "Dad," he said, voice steadier now, "I don't expect your money. I don't expect anything. I just hope one day I'll earn your respect again." I placed a hand on his shoulder, the same hand that once guided his steps, now resting heavier with time. "You already have," I said. "You've earned my respect, not my wealth." His eyes glistened. "That's all I ever wanted." "Every one. 6 times. We started walking back toward the parking lot together, the boards echoing beneath our feet. The night smelled of salt and forgiveness. Halfway down, I looked at him and said, "You know, when I built those hotels, I thought legacy meant buildings. Turns out, it meant this standing here with you, both still trying." Daniel smiled. "Then I guess we're both under construction." I laughed, the sound startlingly light in my throat. "Yeah, maybe for the first time, it's a good thing." Is applies. We reached the end of the pier, where the sand met the street. The ocean behind us murmured like an old friend finally making peace. I turned once more, looking out toward the fading horizon. "You see that line where the water meets the sky?" Daniel followed my gaze. "Yeah, that's where I finally found the shore I thought I'd lost." He didn't speak, just nodded, eyes glistening in the last of the light. For the first time in years, we walked side by side, father and son, Not perfect, not whole, but real. And that, I realized, was more than enough. Our 40th wedding anniversary fell on a Saturday, warm and windy. The church hall by the marina was dressed in white lilies and soft golden lights. The same pastor who'd married us was now too frail to attend, so his daughter, who ran the community choir, offered to host the celebration. She said, "You two have outlived half the scandals in this county. That deserves cake." Frank had organized the guest list. "Everyone who ever mattered, John," he said. And he meant it, old staff from the first read-in, neighbors who'd brought us casseroles during the bad months, even the mayor who once avoided us after the fraud case broke. People came, not for wealth, but for memory. Eleanor, radiant in a pale blue dress, stood beside me near the entrance. Her hair was silver now, but her smile could still light a dock at midnight. When the doors opened, laughter and piano music filled the room, and then two little voices cut through everything. Grandpa, Noah, Sophie. They ran like twin comets, straight into my arms. I nearly fell back, laughing, their small hands clutching my shirt. Eleanor bent down, hugging them both as tears glittered in her eyes. Behind them stood Daniel, taller, steadier, his tie slightly crooked, holding a bouquet of white roses. He smiled the way only someone humbled by life could smile, small, genuine, without the need to prove anything. "Happy anniversary, Dad, Mom." Eleanor took the roses, her voice trembling. "You remembered." "Every year," he said, "even when I didn't deserve to show up." I clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You're here now. That's what counts." After Inizertis. The evening unfolded like a second chance none of us had asked for, but all secretly wanted. People shared stories about the early hotel days, about Eleanor's baking disasters, about how I once painted over an entire wall because I thought the color looked too ambitious. Daniel sat among them, listening, laughing, belonging. For the first time in years, I saw my son without the shadow of shame hanging over him. He wasn't perfect, but he was present. When dinner was served, I took my place beside Eleanor at the head table. Frank tapped his glass and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, 40 years, that's 40 hurricanes survived, 40,000 arguments forgiven, and probably 40 times Jonathan tried to fix something that wasn't broken." Laughter rippled through the room. Then Daniel stood. The chatter quieted, forks paused. He held his glass, eyes sweeping the room before settling on us. "I used to think wealth meant freedom," he began, "that the more I had, the more alive I'd feel. But I learned the hard way that freedom isn't having everything. It's living without shame." The room went silent, like even the air was listening. He turned toward me. "Dad, you once told me dignity costs more than dollars. I didn't understand it then. I do now. You didn't just save a business, you saved a man too stubborn to know what he was losing." He raised his glass slightly. "To the ones who built, not just walls, but bridges. To my parents, the reason I learned what worth truly means." Eleanor's tears came before the applause. She reached for my hand under the table, squeezing tight. I looked at her, then at Daniel, and for the first time, I felt no bitterness in my chest, only pride, clean and quiet. Frank leaned toward me, whispering, "Guess the boy grew up after all." "Yeah," I said softly. "He did." After dessert, people drifted out to the deck overlooking the marina. The night smelled of salt and celebration. The choir sang an old hymn, "Abide with Me." Eleanor hummed along, her voice trembling with every word. I excused myself for a moment and went back inside. From my coat, I pulled a manila envelope, one that had been sitting in my desk drawer for months. Inside was the new will, revised, rewritten, ready, but unsigned. I walked to the table where Daniel's speech notes still sat. The room was empty now, only candles flickering low. I laid the envelope on the table, opened it halfway, and stared at the last blank line, my name waiting. Eleanor appeared in the doorway. "What's that?" "The new will," I said quietly. "It's been ready. I just haven't signed it." She stepped closer. "Why not?" I traced a finger over the page. "Because I needed to be sure. Not about him, about me. About whether I was giving from pride or peace." She smiled sadly. "So, what now?" I folded the document gently and set it back in the envelope. "Now, I'll sign it when I know it's right." Her eyes softened. You already do. Maybe she was right, but I wasn't ready yet. Later that night, when everyone was gone, the four of us, Eleanor, Daniel, and the twins, stood outside by the water. The moon painted silver across the waves. Sophie pointed to the horizon. "Grandpa, is that where you built your hotels?" I chuckled. "Something like that, sweetheart, but the best thing I ever built is standing right here." Daniel smiled, quiet and proud. "You know, Dad, I think you were right about something else too." "What's that?" "That the sea never really gives back what it takes. It just teaches you how to let go." I looked at him for a long time, the boy who had once betrayed me, the man who now spoke like a philosopher born from wreckage. "You learned that faster than I did," I said. He laughed softly. "Guess we both needed storms to find the shore." Eleanor slipped her hand into mine. The twins ran along the dock, their laughter echoing against the water. For a moment, it felt like time itself paused, not to erase the past, but to honor it. Time, like the tide, has its own quiet rhythm. 10 years have passed since that night at the marina. The twins are in middle school now, sharp, funny, and endlessly curious. Daniel is 42, and though streaks of gray have started to thread his hair, there's a calm about him that I never had at his age. He's not chasing ghosts anymore. He's building. Reed Hospitality didn't just survive, it transformed. After the scandal, we rebuilt every policy, every partnership, every value. Daniel spearheaded the Miami branch, working harder than I'd ever seen him work, taking the morning shifts others avoided, staying after hours to help new employees balance their books. When people complimented me on how honest our company had become, I told them, that wasn't me, that was my son. I was nearly 70 when the board asked me to step down officially. Daniel took over as CEO of the Miami division, though I still came by the office sometimes, mostly to sit by the window, drink burnt coffee, and watch him lead. He treated every worker from the cleaning staff to investors with the same patience, the same decency. That, more than any quarterly report, was proof enough. It was a warm afternoon when I sat at my desk, the old mahogany one Eleanor had polished for decades, and opened the drawer that held my unfinished business. The new will, still unsigned after all these years, waited inside. Eleanor entered the room quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Still thinking about it?" she asked. I smiled. "You know me. I think about everything twice before doing it once." She chuckled. "And yet you always find your way to what's right." I looked out toward the ocean through the window. The sunlight flickered across the waves, the same golden shimmer that had been there since the beginning. 40 years of work, I said, almost to myself. And it still comes down to one decision. Eleanor set down the mugs, her eyes tender but firm. "John, it's not about money anymore. It's about trust. The legacy you leave should carry peace, not doubt." I nodded. "Then peace it is." I reached for the pen. My hand trembled, but not from fear, from the weight of time. Slowly, I signed my name. Jonathan Reed. Beneath it, in clear script, the clause I'd rewritten myself. To my son, Daniel Reed, 20% of Reed Hospitality Holdings, not by blood, but by worth. When the ink dried, I exhaled. "There," I said quietly. "Now it's right." Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening. "You didn't just sign a paper, John. You closed a wound." I reached for her hand. "Maybe both." We took our tea out to the patio that evening, watching the sun bleed into the Gulf. The same view we'd seen for decades, yet somehow it looked different, softer, wiser, as if it, too, had aged alongside us. Eleanor rested her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever think about what all this meant? The hotels, the money, the mistakes?" I nodded slowly. "Every day. But lately, I've realized something. Wealth built walls between me and Daniel, between us and the world. But love built bridges, and those bridges held when the walls fell." She smiled through her tears. "That's the legacy you should remember." I chuckled softly. "Already written in my journal." "You're still writing that thing?" "Every night," I said. "It helps me stay honest with myself." Later, when the stars came out, I returned to my desk one last time. I opened the worn leather notebook that had followed me through every stage of my life, from the first motel sketch to the court hearings that nearly destroyed me. On the last page, I wrote slowly, letting the pen linger on each word. Wealth built walls. Love built bridges. That's the legacy I choose. I closed the book and placed it beside the framed photo of Eleanor and me taken long ago, at the ribbon cutting of our first hotel. We looked impossibly young, sunburned, and full of dreams. And yet, in that moment, I realized we had achieved every single one. Not because of fortune, not because of success, because we had survived with our hearts still open. A few days later, Daniel came by with the twins. They ran through the hallway, filling the house with the kind of noise that makes silence worth missing. Eleanor baked a pie because, as she said, forgiving people deserves dessert. Daniel joined me on the porch, 2 beers in hand. He handed me one, then looked out toward the water. I heard from Frank, he said. He told me you signed it. I nodded. It was time. His. He was quiet for a moment. Dad, I don't care about the percentage. You know that, right? I know, I said. But I needed to make it clear respect earns more than inheritance ever could. He smiled. Then I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. I clinked my bottle against his. Deal. The twins burst out onto the porch, barefoot and laughing, chasing each other with sparklers Eleanor had found in a drawer. Their laughter mingled with the sound of the waves. Daniel leaned back, watching them. You ever miss the early days? The chaos? The ambition? I shook my head. No, I miss believing everything would last forever. But I think what we've got now, that's better. It's fragile, but it's real. He nodded, his gaze softening. Real is enough. The night deepened. Eleanor joined us, slipping her hand into mine. The moonlight traced silver across her hair. We sat together, 3 generations of Reeds bound not by business or bloodlines, but by something stronger. When the wind shifted, I could smell the sea salt. Memory, forgiveness. It smelled like home. I closed my eyes, feeling Eleanor's pulse under my thumb. After everything, betrayal, loss, redemption, the world had gone quiet again. Not empty, just full of peace. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right